In the continent of Africa, there lies a point where four countries come together to form an almost quadripoint. The countries responsible are Zambia, Zimbabwe, Botswana, and Namibia. Looks like an obvious quadripoint here, but I said an almost quadripoint, implying that this isn't really a quadripoint. So what stops this geopolitical quadripoint from being one down to the surface? This gap right here, all for the low distance of 150 meters, can you be blueballed into thinking that this is an actual quadripoint? Rather deceitful, isn't it? Despite this being such a short distance, it's the closest thing to a current quadripoint we have at a sovereign nation level, even being dubbed as the Four Corners of Africa. And yeah, that nickname does hold up, since all four countries are right over there from the other one. But as far as geopolitics go, it's more like the two tripoints next to each other of Africa. The beginnings of such a border, as do most stuff in Africa, starts at the scramble for Africa. In southern Africa, there are three colonial powers: Portugal, the UK, and Germany. Portugal has got these, the UK has this, and Germany has that. Earlier in the scramble in 1890, Germany wanted to have an efficient way of getting from German Southwest Africa to German East Africa. Unfortunately, the easiest way to get there by land was off the list, since the UK just solidified its claims to all this by threatening Portugal for claiming the same area. The other option for Germany was to gain access to the Zambezi, which could have allowed them to access East Africa through the river. And all Germany had to do now was to ask the UK if it could have just a little bit of land for that goal. Hey, Britain. Yes, Germany. I was gonna ask if I could have access to the Zambezi, yeah? Oh yeah, of course you can. Really? Yep. But I want some favours first. One Anglo-German treaty later, and Germany now has the Capivri Strip and access to the Zambezi, which would be rendered entirely useless because of Victoria Falls being right in the way. And the UK knew about this, but didn't tell Germany. But Germany would find out about the waterfall themselves sooner or later. Internationally, the future would almost be quadripoint looks nowhere how close it is today. After the First World War, Germany loses Southwest Africa, and after the Second World War, attitudes to African colonies were now perceived as uncool and cringe. One by one, African colonies became independent. The first of the quadripoint countries to gain independence here was Northern Rhodesia, becoming Zambia in 1964. In 1965, Southern Rhodesia proclaimed independence, becoming Rhodesia, which led to some complications, and that leaves Botswana land, still part of the UK, but it now means that there are four countries here to make the quadripoint. If that's what you want to believe. You see, the thing is, even though the assumption can be made that there being a quadripoint between the four here meets to the Zambezi, the boundaries were never truly defined, which makes this measure of territory in some way up to personal interpretation, especially for these four. In 1970, South Africa started the quadripoint discussion by believing that a quadripoint in the Zambezi existed, making a connection from the now independent Botswana to Zambia impossible. Meanwhile, Botswana had ferries. Two ferries that act as transport, sailing from Kazungula, Botswana to Kazungula, Zambia. Botswana also had a belief that it had a border with Zambia, making this ferry crossing between the two legal. South Africa didn't like that and pushed further that the ferries were making illegal crossings, as it would technically also be crossing South Africa and Rhodesia waters, even if the ferries were in the waters for mere seconds. Botswana stood its ground and claims the quadripoint didn't exist. Now, being the Cold War era South Africa, I'm sure they were able to resolve such minor disputes like calm, reasonable nations. That was a warning. The next time I won't be so kind. And they were right, because the next militant confrontation sunk one of the ferries. But South Africa didn't do it, it was Rhodesia, who also sided with South Africa and the claims of a quadripoint existing. A slight kick in tensions, but as far as I'm aware, that was the highest it ever got. In the coming future from here, Namibia was now independent and Rhodesia is the now internationally recognised Zimbabwe. And there were talks between Botswana and Zambia about ditching the ferries used to cross the Zambezi in exchange for a bridge, which would provide a gargantuan relief of local transportation delays from the two. But during the initial planning of the bridge, Zimbabwe kept hold onto its beliefs that a quadripoint was there. And just because a tiny part of the bridge supposedly crossed into Zimbabwe, they lost their shit, refusing to cooperate with both Botswana and Zambia. But this was a time when Mugabe was still the leader of Zimbabwe, so their response sounds about right. So what can these two possibly do about this? A country that is against the bridge and still believes that this area is a quadripoint, and also has a leader that is just unhinged enough to do something drastic about it. Namibia, can you help us out with our bridge? Yeah, sure. What do you need help with? Well, Zimbabwe still thinks that there's a quadripoint here, which means that we don't border each other according to them. Mine's giving up a few meters to increase my boundary so the bridge can curve around them. Alright, consider it done. Awesome, thanks Namibia. And that's where the Cousin Gouda Bridge gets its curve from. At least that's what some say. Others say the two already bordered with each other and the bridge was built to avoid Zimbabwe and Namibia. See, the quadripoint is even debatable in journalism. Despite whatever the true answer to it is, the construction of the bridge was eventually started in 2014 and finished only recently in May of 2021. And now the bridge is built, it not only serves as a way for efficient goods transportations, but also a tourist hotspot for the environment around the bridge, with the views of the Zambezi and the surrounding lands where the four countries meet. Would you, dear viewer, class this as a quadripoint regardless of the lines on a map? Or would you go by the lines and debate the quadripoint's existence? If you've chosen the latter, I sincerely hope you have boat insurance. But until then, this has been a certified History in MS Paint production. I hope you enjoyed, and as always, thank you for watching.